Will America's trillion-dollar debt crisis collapse the American empire? America's massive $28 trillion debt threatens its global power, echoing past empires like Rome, Spain, France, and Britain, which crumbled under such similar financial strains. America is sailing into dangerous waters of debt, with the government racking up trillions in borrowed money while the public and politicians seem strangely unfazed. Both President Biden and former President Trump have overseen massive increases in the national debt, yet there's little concern from voters or clarity from Washington on how to reverse course. Historian Niall Ferguson warns that past empires crumbled under similar financial strain, with debt spiraling so high that interest payments now exceed what's spent on defense. And despite this, the U.S. has not hit a crisis point yet. The question remains whether America can steer back from the brink, as it did briefly in the 1990s, or if its spending spree will lead to a reckoning that diminishes its global stature. America is sailing into uncharted territory when it comes to federal debt, with the public appearing unconcerned about the startling statistics and the government appearing powerless to reverse them. There is not much of a partisan edge or difference in opinion in this presidential contest. Both President Trump and President Biden have presided over increases in the country's debt accumulation over their tenure, totaling at roughly $7 trillion in each case. Generally speaking, the country has chosen to ignore both of them. Nonetheless, history provides some sobering insights regarding the perils of being deeply indebted. Nations and empires that carelessly accrue debt have sooner or later met unpleasant ends throughout the ages and around the world. Let's remember Russia had sold Alaska to the United States because of its debt. Now, invoking what he terms his rule of history, historian Niall Ferguson recently stated that any great power that spends more on debt service, that is, interest payments on the national debt, than on defense will not stay great for very long, which is the case today of the United States. As was the case with Habsburg Spain, the French Revolution, the Ottoman Empire, and the British Empire, this law is set to be tested by the United States starting this year. The Congressional Budget Office projects that the federal government will spend $892 billion on interest payments on the $28 trillion national debt during the current fiscal year, partly due to rising interest rates. And this means that interest payments now exceed defense spending and almost match spending on Medicare. The rate at which Washington has been increasing the national debt is concerning. The federal government's budget was in fact in surplus not so long ago, starting in the late 1990s, at least temporarily. According to the estimate released this week by the Congressional Budget Office, this year will be about $1.9 trillion in deficit. And here we're looking at President Clinton, Vice President Al Gore, underlining their proposed surplus budget for the coming fiscal year, the first in decades, in a White House event February 2nd, 1998. Now, the total amount of government debt represented about 70% of the country's GDP just a decade ago. It will be almost equivalent to the GDP this year, and somewhat greater when extra government accounts are taken into account. It's predicted to surpass the record set by during the massive spending to finance World War II by 2028, coming in at 106% of GDP. By 2034, assuming no tax changes in spending policy, is projected to hit 122% of GDP, the highest level ever recorded. If buried, this crimson ink may have devastating effects, according to CBO projections. Over the next 3 decades, the burden of debt will stifle income growth by 12% as debt payments displace other investments. Nothing about this course or its outcomes is predetermined, and without the spending caps and policy adjustments, including the much malignant Fiscal Responsibility Act that the Biden administration got through last year, the deficit this year would have been greater. More generally, it's shown that previous predictions that crises arising from mounting indebtedness would not be justified. Even the modern monetary theory of economics urges that nations in control of their currencies need not be concerned about the negative effects of debt, as they can always print more money and never run out of money or be forced to default. However, looking back at the past does not bring comfort. The director of the British Institute Southern Methodist University Economic Growth Initiative, J.H. Cullum Clark, states that just does not bail countries out. Even if their nation issues the main reserve currency and holds a dominating geopolitical position, they do not lose that status. Clark, a writer on historical lessons concerning debt and global dominance, cites the Roman Empire as an early example of prudence. In the 3rd century, once their empire had become the most powerful in the world, Rome's rulers started to squander money on the army and imperial administration. Emperors devalued the currency to pay for the ensuing debt, which led to severe inflation. As a result, the empire's defenses and stability were undermined, and it fell in the 5th century. Once it gained a footing in the New World, Spain used heavy borrowing from overseas and high taxes to fund her military expeditions and global empire, and as a result, it lost its position in the most powerful nation in Europe. Spain managed to default 7 times in the 19th century alone, after having defaulted 6 times in the preceding 3 centuries, according to economists Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff in their examination of the history of global financial crises. This time is different. 8 centuries of financial folly. France followed a similar course and regularly fell behind on its debt. In the end, the royals' extravagant borrowing and spending by the Versailles court caught up with them, resulting in deindustrialization and financial troubles that sparked the 1789 revolution. The spending of France's opulent court at Versailles. Now, the Qing dynasty in China experienced a comparable cycle and met a comparable end. Although it was a major economic force in the world, its 19th century borrowing and spending caused detrimental underinvestment in the infrastructure that the country required to continue growing. And perhaps the most striking similarities can be seen with Great Britain. Before military expenditures, particularly the struggle against the American Revolution, resulted in significant debt, it ruled the most extensive empire in the world during the 18th and 19th centuries. After recovering, it realized in the 20th century that it could no longer afford to retain an army and navy to police the empire and to fund social programs that were expanding at an accelerated rate. Other investments started to get crowded out by debt, and the British pound lost value due to weakening economic conditions. The British Empire quickly began to fall as the pound lost its position as the primary reserve currency of the world. According to Clark, given the current circumstances, a downgrading of America's credit rating or the refusal of foreign financiers to extend loans might be the catalyst for the debt crisis. The United States is not there yet. In a recent interview with CNBC, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen explained that we're in a reasonable place if debt could be stabilized at present levels. However, she has also cautioned that extending the tax cuts from the Trump administration, which are scheduled to expire in 2019, will increase the amount of debt in the country relative to its GDP. The good news is that there are cases where countries have managed to stabilize their financial situation and global standing by emerging from a mountain of debt. Before tumbling backwards, Britain pulled off the ruse, and countries like Canada, Denmark, Sweden, and Finland have all recovered financially from more recent debt problems. In actuality, this was not too long ago in the United States. There were severe worries about quickly increasing debts in the 1980s. Amidst these concerns, Yale historian Paul Kennedy released The Rise and Fall of Great Powers, a seminal study that chronicled the fate of dominating nations who overreached themselves. The work explored the historical relationship between economic strength and international dominance. He pointed out that the United States was borrowing money during a period of peace more than any other major nation had since France in the 1780s. However, the American political system responded by enacting policy measures that led to the 1990s brief surplus period and helped to contain deficits through successive bipartisan agreements. However, Kennedy's prediction that the compounding of national debt and interest payments will cause quite unprecedented totals of money to be diverted in that direction by the 21st century is now becoming a reality. Kennedy foresaw a decrease in American dominance, some of which appears to have been avoided thus far. In an interview, he informed me that he has been asking my economist friends about this conundrum of a very, very large and in some ways overextended great power being able to keep issuing more and more of its currency-denominated bonds without there being, shall we say, punishment for it. He continues by saying that the punishment might still occur if Asian countries, especially China, which currently owns a substantial amount of U.S. Treasury bonds, just decided for some reason of having a political quarrel with the United States to dump vast amounts of treasuries, causing a financial and economic crisis. For the time being, increased interest rates and the insufficient revenue generated by the current tax structure to support Social Security and Medicare are what are driving up the debt. These dynamics occur at a time when Republicans want to lower taxes and Democrats promise not to raise taxes on families earning less than $400,000. Neither party wants to touch these entitlement programs. The debt is mostly being used by both political parties as an excuse to carry out policies that they would have otherwise preferred to implement. For example, some Republicans opposing more aid to Ukraine and some Democrats proposing higher taxes on corporations and the wealthy. Overall, the conversation about deficit and debt is devalued on its terms. Beyond that would need summoning a discipline and bipartisan commitment that, though occasionally present in the past, are glaringly absent from Washington, D.C. these days. This is on Great Game India. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. My Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.